What up, YouTube fam? We in here, Anthony Talk Life, back with another video, and in this one I want to talk about black and white conversions. Now, too often I see people, when they convert an image to black and white, they will just remove the saturation and call it a day, and that really isn't enough when you're doing a black and white conversion. Now, when it comes to a black and white, a true black and white image technically should have a true white point and a true black point. Now, when it comes to portraits, that can be a little challenging, more so than it is with landscape. With landscape, you don't have to worry about skin tones and that sort of thing. Whereas with portraits, you do have to worry about your subject. So you can't necessarily always have that true white point and that true black point, but you should always be striving for that. And the problem when you just remove the saturation, or when you're in Lightroom or Capture One and you just convert it to black and white, the problem is there really is no true black and white. It really is a lot of mid-tone, a lot of gray. So that black and white image ends up looking very muddy, and it's just not good. And also a problem that you can run into is most times people will convert an image to black and white without knowing that they wanted to convert it to black and white when they shot it. Now, the reason why that's important is because since a black and white image doesn't have color, it relies on basically the contrast between your highlights and your shadows. So when you know up front that you're going to convert an image to black and white, or you're shooting knowing that it's going to be a black and white image, you can specifically look for light that is contrasty, that is going to yield itself to the best black and white image. Oftentimes when we're doing it after the fact, it's because the lighting wasn't really that great. The color, there was not a lot of color in the image, or maybe there was some color casting. You know, typically when people convert something to black and white, more times than not, it's because they can't make the image work in color. And so when you can't make an image work in color, what do you normally do? You convert it to black and white. Or they may think that having it in black and white makes the image stronger. And I think even in that regard, I don't always see where that's the case. I think people think that just converting an image to black and white will make it timeless and will, make it have this significant meaning and impact. And that's just not the case. Some images don't work in black and white. That's just the reality. And I'm not sitting here trying to say that I'm, an expert at black and white or anything of the sort. Just kind of giving you my thoughts and opinion on it. So when it comes to black and white, you need to keep in mind that you only really have luminosity, light. So you really need contrast between your highlight and your shadow. So if we jump in here, I have a couple of examples from a shoot that I did way back in the pandemic. This was a shoot where I was simulating film, so I wasn't able to actually use the viewfinder or look at the pictures or anything of the sort. And so I kind of want to give some examples of where black and white doesn't work, and then a couple of examples where black and white kind of works better. So in this first one, if I just do a simple conversion to black and white, well, let me first I just take the saturation away. Now, that's what a lot of people will typically do, and you certainly do have a technical black and white image here. But the one thing that you may notice, or maybe you don't notice, and the one thing that I want to point out is that the problem with this image is that there really isn't any contrast. Now, first of all, this image was taken in shadow, complete shade, not shadow. It was taken in complete shade. So there really aren't any highlights. There are some shadows, but there's really no real highlights. But the biggest problem here is that there is a lot of mid-tone and a lot of highlight, and then very little black. So in this conversion here, there really just isn't enough contrast between basically black and white to make this be a strong image. Now, even if I go in here and crop, because the bottom is it's a little heavy there. So if I come in here and even crop in and kind of get rid of that and straighten it up, because that will bother me if I don't. So even if we come in here and look at this here, there's just still a lot of highlight and mid-tone and not a lot of black. So I'm going to come over here to a second one so that way we can have a comparison, and we'll do the same thing. We'll crop this one as well and straighten it out there. I'm gonna bring it in, but this time I'm gonna process it a little more. So even if we go that way, the way to really do it, if you're gonna do a black and white, would be to use this and actually convert it to a black and white. But for the sake of this, I'm gonna just take the saturation down again. So the first thing you're gonna wanna do is obviously put in contrast, right? Because if the main thing for a black and white is that you want that contrast between your highlight and your shadow. And I feel like I'm shaking my camera over there. It must be like right on my desk. So I apologize for that. So you need contrast, right? So the first thing we want to do is increase that contrast. And basically what that does is it makes your darks darker, your lights whites brighter. Okay, so there's your contrast. Now, the next thing you want to do is, going back to what I said about a black and white, you really want to have true black, true white. You want to use your white and black sliders to see where you are. Now you can use the histogram to get an idea. And if we look at the histogram here, you can see that we're pretty heavy here in the mid-tones and in the highlights, but you know, there's nothing over here in the whites really. There's not much going on over here in the blacks either. But if you come to the white and black slider and you hit the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key for Windows, I'm a Mac user now, so I forgot some of the shortcuts for Windows. But if you hit that key and then you move the slider, it'll bring up this mass view here where you can see where you basically have pixels that are being clipped. So I'm on the black slider now. So as you start to see that information show up, that basically is information that is clipped in your blacks. So if I was to take that off, you can see, and if I hover the mouse over there and you look at the histogram up there, you see complete 0 values, which means that it's complete black. And the same thing will apply for the white. As you start to see the white show, that's going to be areas that are complete clipped. Now, where this helps is that it allows you to basically stretch out the overall tonal exposure in your image to basically try to get as close as you can to your pure black and to your pure white. Now, when I mentioned earlier, it's not always possible with the portrait versus the landscape, is because you do have skin tones and you have a person that you're dealing with. So you don't want to blow out the skin. You don't want to blow out what they're wearing. You don't want to blow out anything on the subject. And you don't necessarily want to blow out other components of the image either. So it isn't always possible to do this. But what I like to do is to basically use this as a bit of a guideline to get me close. So typically what I'll do is I'll get it to the point where I'm starting to see some items being clipped, and then I'll pull it back a little bit. And I'll do that for both the white point and the black point. And then I take a look at it and kind of see where I'm at. Sometimes based off of that, the highlights might be a little bit too blown out or too overexposed. And so I'll pull them back again, pull them back a little bit. So again, you may not always be able to get your true black and your true white point, but you want to get as close as possible. So this isn't bad here. The skin tone isn't looking great based off of the black point. So maybe I would want to bring up the shadows a little bit, or maybe do a local adjustment here on the face just to kind of bring some life back into the skin tone there. And typically when you're doing this with portraits, one area that you're I won't say always, but one area where you definitely will have issues is in the hair. When you bring that black point down, you start to lose all the detail in the hair. And depending upon what the image is, you may be okay with that. I typically don't love that. I don't love when, you know, hair is just kind of this block of black information and you can't see any detail in the hair, especially for women. They put a lot of effort and work into doing their hair. So if they can't see that detail, it's not a good thing. So that's what you really have to be careful for. And I'll typically use some local adjustments to go in and try to fix that and get that to show a little bit more. So let's see if I can bring a little bit of that back. Now, since this was taken in shade, I really probably didn't have a whole lot of detail anywhere. And I'm being very crass with this. So I would definitely put a lot more effort into this if this was real. But let's try to bring a little bit more detail back into the hair. So that's looking looking decent. Come over here, the shirt's definitely is a little exposed, so I might come in here with an adjustment brush here and maybe bring that down a little bit as well. And again, I'm keeping it very quick and using the mouse, so my precision is going to be non-existent here. Well, we may bring that down. Okay. And then a way to kind of give, your black and white a little punch is to use the clarity. Now, I typically do not use clarity, at least on the side of adding clarity to portraits 99% of the time. I think clarity really does something to skin that I just personally don't like. So I really don't use clarity when it's a color, but in black and white, I will add a little bit of clarity just to kind of give the image a little bit of pop. So we'll bring that up a little bit. And, again, like I said, this isn't really an image that lends itself very well to being a black and white because there's just not enough shadow. But if we do compare the two, so the one on the right is where we simply just took out the saturation. The one on the left is, where I did a little bit more processing with it. You can see that the one on the left has just a little bit more punch to it. It's a little bit more punchy. The blacks are a little bit more crunchy. There's just more life to that one than there is to the right one. Now, it still is not a strong black and white image in my opinion because there's just not enough on the black shadow side to really contrast the heaviness of the highlights in the midtones. So it doesn't really work as a black and white. For me, this would just be an image that just wouldn't work. If I couldn't make it work in color and I was trying to convert it in black and white, this just wouldn't be an image that would work for me. So if we go to this next one here, now this one is, there's a lot of problems with this one. And again, I was simulating film, so I was trying to like meter the exposure, and this is when my meter was still messed up before I sent it in to get fixed. So it was all messed up. But you can see here, we've got heavy highlight. The sky is completely blown out. So we've got a lot of highlight here, We've got some flare going on over here, heavy backlit situation. This is just a very tough image to work with. Even the color, there's not a lot of color because of how heavy it is with the sky and the top of the building here. So there's not a lot of color. So this is an image where people would typically say, if they really wanted to make this work, just convert it to black and white. The color is not good, the light's not good, convert it to black and white. So in this one, for the sake of it, I'm gonna use that. So we converted to black and white, and it's not bad, right? If this was absolutely an image that had to be delivered, this very well could work. Now I'm gonna crop it down just to get rid of some of this sky. And when you're doing black and white conversions, you really need to look at all of those things. Put more thought into the image. Don't just desaturate it and call it a day. Really look at the image, analyze it, assess it, and figure out what you need to do to make that image stronger as a black and white image, okay? So if I crop that down, so we kind of can get rid of some of that blown out sky, because there's just no reason to have a ton of that in there whatsoever. Okay, so now this isn't terrible. So again, we could do the same thing. We can come here and we can add a little contrast. We can come see what our black point is. And then our white point, we've obviously got a lot of white. So in a case like this, if I click this and I already have a lot of clipped highlights right from the jump, I will go the other way to try to minimize that. Now, this is completely blown. There's no recovering this, so it's not going to work too well, but I would typically try to bring that down a little bit. Now we can mess with the highlights here, which will help. And we could even try to bring the exposure down a little bit as well to try to work with that. And then since we brought the exposure down, let's come here. So right there's a little bit, so I might bring it back up a little bit. Then I'm going to look at it. Increase in clarity. So this would be one where I would, if I was going to try to salvage it, I would come in here and do some local adjustments just to, well, actually, you know what? Let's Let's try to do select subject, see how well it does with that. Yeah, Lightroom's really good with the select subject. So in a situation like that, I might bring that exposure up a little bit, bring the shadows up. Let's see what we could do. So that's not bad. And then so if we come here, I'm just going to convert to black and white, and then we're going to do a compare. Obviously I would put more time into this if it was legit. You know what, let's crop this one as well. Synchronize the crop. Okay, so now let's compare. So now the one on the left is the one that we just basically converted to black and white. The one on the right is the one that I processed. So again, as you can see, even though this is an image that in my opinion doesn't really work well for being converted to a black and white because there's so much highlight and there's just not enough shadow to really balance that black and white, you can still see that the one on the right, where I've done a little bit more processing to it, is just a more crisp, more punchy black and white. So it really works better versus the very gray and muddy of the one where we just converted it to a black and white. So now let's move on to one that I think yields itself a little bit better to a black and white. Now in this one here, not that it was planned by any means, but this one here, we have good contrast right in the base image of our highlights and our shadows. So we basically have highlight here, we have shadow here, the subject is lit, and we've got a little bit of blown out ground here, which is fine, we can get rid of that. But in looking at this, we already have luminosity contrast. She is lit very well because I basically use open shade to light this. She is lit very well. We've got a lot of shadow back here. We've got some mid-tones here. So this is a case where even just converting this to black and white, it already is pretty strong without doing any work whatsoever, because that contrast of light was already present in the base image. So we're starting with a very strong image right off the gate, right off the bat, okay? So let's crop this down first, and let's get rid of some of that ground highlight there. And then I want to carry that over to this image here. And we're going to process this one a little bit more. So we want to start with the contrast. We're going to go with the black, bring that down a little bit. Cool. Bring this up. Cool. So that's already looking good. This is still a little too blown out for me, so I would come in here, do a linear gradient just to be able to bring those highlights down and get some of that detail back in there. So that looks good. I'm going to do a select subject just to kind of pop her out of it just a little bit more. So we're going to increase that, increase the contrast just a little bit more. Bring down the highlights a hair, and then pop up the clarity just a little bit. So again, I'm being quick, but I just want to show. So if we compare these two here, so the one on the left was just the quick conversion. The one on the right, it's actually it's not all that punchy. So I think we can go for bringing the blacks down just a little bit more. Oh, and I didn't add any base clarity. So that's looking good. Maybe bring those highlights down a bit, because again, we don't want to blow out that skin tone. So if we compare those two, and clearly I'm not staying consistent in this video, but that's okay. I keeps it real. So the one on the right is the one that is just converted to the black and white. The one on the left has a little bit more processing done. And again, the same thing is applicable here. The one where I've processed it a little bit, it's just a more punchy black and white. It works better as a black and white than just removing the color. That's the point that I'm really trying to drive home, is that converting to black and white is not just about taking away the color. It is about increasing that contrast between your highlight and shadow. So I don't want to beat a dead horse. So I'm just going to do one more here. And this one is the same. Okay, this one in and of itself, the base image already yields itself for black and white because we have good tonal luminosity contrast already. I mean, this up here is basically in complete shadow. She's lit very well. We've got some mid-tone right here. So when you have all of those ingredients in your base image, you are starting out at a very good point for doing a black and white conversion. So if we come here, we convert that one to black and white. Come here, do the same thing over here. Increase that contrast. Check the black point. Of course, there's going to be a ton there. We're going to want to be careful with our skin tones. So maybe bring those highlights down. Punch up the clarity. And we're doing it very quick because I don't want to make this video too long. But hopefully you can see the difference and you can see the point that I'm trying to make. Converting to a black and white really shouldn't just be something that you do because the image didn't work or because you think that it's going to make the image stronger. In my opinion, and this is just my opinion, you are free to disagree if you would like, but in my opinion, converting an image to a black and white should be something that accents the image and not is something that makes the image work. So if your lighting isn't good or you have bad color or you think that by converting it to black and white it's going to make the mood or emotion in the image better, that typically is not the case most times. There are some times where removing the color and converting it to a black and white simplifies the image so that the viewer really only focuses on, say, for example, a meaningful moment. So if you had for example, a wedding, first look or something, by removing the color from that image, it allows the viewer to just focus on that moment instead of analyzing everything else in the image. So there are times where converting something to black and white does simplify the image, and therefore that simplification does make the image stronger. But most times it doesn't work that way. Okay, so when you're converting it to a black and white, you really need to look at what you have and process it in a way to make it the strongest black and white image that you can. And sometimes you just have to accept that some images just can't be salvaged. Okay, some images, the lighting just doesn't work, the composition just doesn't work, the framing just doesn't work, the image itself just doesn't work. As photographers, we have to understand that sometimes it just won't work. And that's okay. We can't save everything, and we don't get every single image that we take, we don't knock it out the park. So it's fine to just admit and say to yourself, this doesn't work, move on to something else. Typically, you will probably have another image from that moment or something else that works that you can use instead of trying to salvage something that really doesn't work. So hopefully this video was helpful. I really just wanted to bring you into my mind on black and white conversion and how I see it and how I do it. So hopefully you found some value here. So if you did, or if you just want to support me and my channel, please give this video a thumbs up. I'm trying to get to 5,000 subscribers. I know I've always said I don't really care about the number, and I really don't, but I'm just setting goals for myself this year with my Instagram and my social media, my YouTube. I'm just setting goals because that's just the thing to do. So I would love to see myself get to 5,000 subscribers. So if you want to help, like this video, that definitely helps. If you want to make sure that you don't miss any future videos, go ahead and subscribe, ring that notification bell. As always, you know it, I appreciate you. I appreciate you watching my videos. And until the next video, take care.